All right. So David's back. I'm very excited that we have David Rosenblum here with us today. I can say that he is a marvelous man and his wife is equally marvelous. I enjoy them both greatly. David was diagnosed with ESRD back in May of 2002, and he spent 6.5 years on dialysis, 3 in center plus 3 on home hemodialysis with the next stage. And then he got a transplant in 2008. He was the first USC transplantee who had practiced home hemodialysis, and he knows how isolated, lonely, and often angry dialysis and transplant waiting list patients are, and how much they are in need of support and education. Found in communications, public relations, managerials of nonprofits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he has been an active kidney patient advocate and mentor since 2009. The year he self-published a memoir dealing with his life as a kidney patient entitled Becoming Me, which is now available on Amazon.
Hi.
With that, I am going to pass you over to David. Please remember that your lines are open. David would like an active conversation with his topics he's going to discuss today. But with your lines being open, you do need to self-mute to reduce any background noise. And with that, David, I'd love to hand it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Could I have the slides up, please? I'm not seeing anything yet. There we go. Okay. I want to talk about depression and its effect on most dialysis patients' lives. It's been estimated that upwards of 80% of dialysis patients are depressed at one time or another, and some continually. Could we go to that's the end of the yeah. This problem of patient depression is getting to be a big topic. This is a quote from the Clinical Journal of American Society of Nephrology from last month, June 28th, in fact. It came out online. And it says, greater awareness of patients' emotional experience is a dimension of chronic illness that can be of immense importance to patients that's often invisible to clients, to clinicians, excuse me. Which is you people. We don't want to be, we're not being critical to be critical. We're just being open and honest about how a patient views their life on dialysis. And that's my intent today, and to introduce you to a new tool that we've come up with to help patients with depression. This is dialysis patients with depression. Could I have the next slide, please? This is something you all know about. You all screen patients initially when they begin dialysis. But after that, there are very few tools available to help patients move forward after the initial screening. And as we know, the workload in most dialysis clinics is very, very heavy. It's very hard on the staffs. They really don't have the time. They're worried about getting patients set up, getting them on the machine, getting them treated properly, and so on. And then there's all the government paperwork that takes up a huge amount of time. So when it comes to actually helping patients get through their depression problems, there isn't a lot of time left to do much. Can I have the next screen? As a result, there's a group that I sit on called the KPAC, which is the Kidney Patient Advisory Council of the National Forum of ESRD Networks. Now, this is a group made up of one representative from each of the 18 ESRD networks. The ESRD networks, if I'm sure you know about them, but if you don't, they're advisory groups to help dialysis clinicians with patient problems. As a result, we're all volunteers. Anyway, there are 18 of us who sit on this KPAC committee. And last year, we developed a grievance toolkit to help patients and clinicians work out differences and resolve things before they became official grievances. This year, we've decided to work on depression, because depression is one of those things that people have been talking about for a long, long time, but nobody seems to be doing much about it. And I think it's difficult. We all go through periods of depression. Life is stressful these days. And we work on this 24-hour cycle. We never seem to be able to get off of it. And it often takes outside resources to help us get a better perspective, to step back, take a look at what's going on and say, no, I don't want to do this. I'd rather do this. I'd rather restore some good things in my life to give myself balance while I'm working to help myself get better. So this toolkit, which we'll talk about very shortly, was written by patients for patients. All the people on the KPAC have experiences that are very, very similar to mine. They've spent years on dialysis or years with kidney disease. They've had transplants. They've had failed transplants. They've had family members who have gone into dialysis. They've suffered all sorts of hardships, financial and otherwise. So what we've come up with is a real life experience document. Could I have the next slide, please? This is the cover. The Dialysis Patient Depression Toolkit is available online, and we'll give you the link to it. It's about 35 pages. We don't expect you to download it all. You can download it chapter by chapter or page by page, whatever you need. It's an aid to help you help patients, to get them started on a self-help project. And we all know that if we can get patients involved in their own healthcare, they're going to be better for it. We don't want them passive. We want them active. We want them taking a real role in it. And sometimes that means they might be feisty, they might be angry, they're depressed, they might be not communicative at all. And these are problems we all have to deal with. Have the next slide. This is the table of contents. These are the main chapters, and I'll just go through them briefly to give you an overview of what is in the toolkit. And then I want to spend time on chapters 1 or 2. Chapter 1 deals with the emotional demands of dialysis, and we'll get into that. Chapter 2 deals with the signs of depression, what you need to look for, what a patient needs to look for to come to grips with the fact that do they need help. Chapter 3 is self-diagnostic tools. These are aids like the GAD-7 questionnaire on anxiety, the Epworth sleep scale on sleepiness, the substance abuse, KJADE, and the patient health questionnaire, PHQ-9. These are all highly accepted devices. They're not foolproof, but they're a starting point for some self-analysis to decide whether in fact you are clinically depressed and what you need, what kind of help you need. And chapter 4 deals with the type of help that's out there. It deals with everything from support groups and peer mentoring to personal goal setting, to meditation, to spirituality, to exercise, to hobbies, things that people have used successfully to combat depression. And depression is not something that you deal with once and it goes away. Depression is something that is with us. We're human beings. We deal with stress all the time. And if we have the wherewithal to recognize it, then we can keep it out of our lives as much as we possibly can. The chapter on information for professionals is actually a primer for mental health professionals to deal with patients who have ESRD. They may not know much about kidney disease. They may not know much about dialysis, and it's to help them understand what chronic disease is like. Patient resources are support groups, national organizations that provide peer mentoring, and all sorts of other things. And the last two chapters are acknowledgements and the whole ESRD network and toll-free numbers. Could I have the next slide, please? Okay. I'll begin talking about the emotional demands of dialysis. And I'll interject some of my own personal experiences as we go along. And I welcome any kind of comments as I go along. I'm not here to hear myself talk. When you first learn that you need to go on dialysis, it's life-shattering. None of us like change. We fear it. And often the reaction we get, that we have immediately, is anger or depression. Can I have the next slide? What do we fear? Well, we fear the fact that we need a machine to keep us alive. When you're independent and you're living your life and setting your day, whether it's work or free time, or if you're a homemaker or a student, you pretty much decide what you want to do. And that's not true when you go on dialysis. You need to get treatment, and you need to get it at least 3 times a week. And you don't often have a choice of what it is and when it is. So you have already a structure imposed on you that you didn't want, you know very little about, and you're involved in a strange, very strange atmosphere. For many people, it's the first time that they get involved directly with the US medical system, and that can be very, very overwhelming. There's also the family dynamic side. If you're the main breadwinner, you no longer can work full time. You don't have the energy. You need to go to dialysis. You need to readjust how you're going to pay for the mortgage, how you're going to pay for your bills, how you're going to feed your family, and so on. The financial changes, the reduced income, all of it is just so overwhelming that I think in many cases, what you see is a patient who is just clams right up, just can't possibly deal with it. And I found in my own case that if my wife hadn't been there at the beginning for me, taking notes madly, most of what I heard went in one ear and went out the other. My main concern when I crashed into dialysis, basically over a 4-month period, was that I was going to die. It was that simple. And certainly I didn't want to die. But it took a while. It took about 3 months on dialysis before I realized that, well, no, I'm not going to die. And this is a new reality for me, and I've got to learn to live with it. One of the big problems, as you're all aware of, with 3-day-a-week dialysis is the roller coaster ride that you're on with energy. When your blood is clean, you're fine. When it's dirty, you're in bad shape. And then you have the 2-day weekend, which is a major, major problem for a lot of patients. Go to the next slide. You lose your future. This is very, very serious. You lose hope. And if you lose hope, you wonder why bother living? It crosses everyone's mind. You can't do the things that you live to do. You can't necessarily go skiing. You can't swim. You don't have the energy to do hobbies. You can't concentrate well because your blood's dirty. You can't eat many, many favorite foods. And food, as we know, well, what can I tell you? Comfort food is fabulous. And a lot of comfort foods are bad for you when you're on dialysis. And then there's the loss of desire, the low libido. This is the thing we never talk about. Well, sex is a major factor in all of our lives. And I think it's about time we began talking about it, because you can have a great sex life and all of a sudden you have no desire. You have no desire to touch your loved one. You have no desire to be touched. You feel like so undesirable, so negative about yourself that you can't possibly think about sex. And this is really, really bad. Can I have the next slide? These are signs of depression. Just sort of a reminder, this is chapter 2, of what you're seeing in patients. And when you see behaviors like compulsive behavior, like panic attacks, I think you have to say, this person isn't in control of themselves. They're so depressed that they're not acting normally. And what is normal? Okay. What is normal when your life is dependent on a machine, when your time is not yours, your diet is limited, and when you really feel terrible? You have no energy, and you never think you're going to have energy again. You never think you're going to be healthy again. And this is a very, very, very serious matter. You lose self-worth. You feel guilty. A lot of people blame themselves. They withdraw from commerce and from conversation with everyone. We've all seen it. We've all seen the patient who sleeps through dialysis, doesn't talk to anybody. You know, the problems are just myriad. They're so huge, and they're hard to overcome by yourself. And a lot of people have a lot of trouble asking for help. This is what the toolkit is there for. It's there to get these people to realize they're not alone, that there are other people there to help them. Can I have the next slide? More signs of depression. Okay. These are the physical effects that happen to people. No one tells you when you go on dialysis, the longer you're on dialysis, the more problems you'll have with heart disease, with vision, with bone loss, with other things, because dialysis does not replace a kidney. Nothing does. We become addicted to things. We become addicted to drugs, to alcohol, because we have pain. We do things we shouldn't do in even greater degree than we would even before we were on dialysis. And we get aggressive. Many people get very aggressive. They have frequent mood swings, and basically they feel they're alone. They feel nobody understands their predicament, and nobody's there to help me. I'll tell you one story that particularly sticks in my mind after all these years. When I was put in a unit in Glendale, when I first crashed into dialysis, it was a very well-run unit. It was relatively small. We got a lot of personal attention. But there were people there that were so depressed that it affected most everybody. And often what happens is a patient dies. Usually it's an elderly patient or something. And they're there one day and they're not there the next. And no one ever says anything. It's like that person never existed. And for someone sitting in a dialysis chair undergoing treatment, they think about, is that going to happen to me? Am I going to be gone one day and forgotten? No one wants that. There was a young man who couldn't have been more than about 20 years old. He had early onset diabetes, very bad. He had already had one foot and part of one leg amputated. And he would literally sit in his chair, actually not even sit, he would be curled up into a fetal position, and he would cry for 3 hours. And there was no one could do anything for him. after a while, no one even tried. And that was awful. He was there for about 2 weeks, and then he was gone. No one ever said what happened to him. And I really think this is unfortunate. Can we have the next slide? So what do we have here? Well, you know, it's easy to say to put yourself in the other person's shoes. In this case, put yourself in the patient's chair. Think about what it would be like to sit there with your arm immobilized for up to 4 hours or more. In some cases, in a lot of pain. In some cases, not quite understanding what's going on, and not really in control of anything. We really need to find out what the patient wants beyond immediate survival. I know all of you are dedicated to saving those patients' lives, and you do that, no doubt about that. But you've got to go beyond that. We've got to get that patient active. We've got to get that patient to be a human being again, even though they're on dialysis. We've got to find ways and resources so they gain some control over their lives. Because that patient, that aware patient is a healthier patient, is a happier person. Can I have the next slide? And I say it here, a happy patient is a compliant patient. Now, compliant is a double-edged sword, is a word, okay? Compliant means a patient who follows instructions and does what he or she is told, keeps their labs good, eats the right food, stays active, and so on and so forth. It's a full-time job, and it's very, very hard. A compliant patient is often one who's back in control of his or her life. But a compliant patient is really not a passive patient. And too many patients are passive. The system as it's set up now makes that patient passive. It says, come into the clinic, sit down, we'll take care of you, you have nothing to worry about. Well, that's not true. If you have a patient sitting there, that's all they do is worry. Some of them have an ability to be active, to occupy their time. I've noticed that particularly with some older patients, older women in particular, they have hobbies, they talk to others, they watch TV. But by and large, your younger patients who are more active are the ones that get depressed. They're the ones that are the hardest ones to take care of, the hardest ones to keep compliant. So what we're looking for here is, I was a compliant patient, okay? I did everything I was told, my labs were always good, and guess what? I got ignored. I still had depression. I couldn't get any help from my social worker because she was too busy. She was intelligent, she was educated, she could help me, but she couldn't find the time. And I went outside. I found a person who was a family counselor who had actually been a cancer survivor and knew what it was to live with a chronic disease. And I saw him for about a year, once every 2 weeks. And it enabled me to open up to deal with what I was, with my depression, and to get over it. And I come from a highly depressive family. I had a brother who committed suicide. I have a mother who was obsessive compulsive, so I know all about depression. Next slide, please. This is the link. Dialysis patient depression number 1 with CEB FB1. If you just copy that onto your browser, your web browser, it will take you right to the page on the National Forum page, and you'll be able to download either the whole toolkit or specific chapters, or whatever you want, even one page. And I highly recommend that when you have a patient, particularly when you have a patient who is prone to read a lot of things and wants more information. This is a good place to start. It's not for everybody, I understand that. But I think for the patient that's inquisitive and that wants to get out of the clinic, wants to get their lives back together, it's a great place to start. I'm basically through with my little spiel here, and I'm open to questions right now from any of you. Anybody?
Please feel free to ask David questions on how to deal maybe with some of your depressed patients or anything you can think of for him. This is an opportunity for us to have a patient so willing to spare his life.
Mr. David, this is Prasian.
Actually,
Like, I just wanted to make like a comment as to, like, you know, how you had made that statement where you guys come in at the clinic and then there are times where you just all of a sudden don't see patients in the clinic. I just wanted to share to you that we feel the same. There are times like when we have patients, we are attached to the patients that we have in the clinic. And when the day comes that they don't show up, it's not that we don't want to share. It's just that we are also bound to where we cannot disclose any information about any other patients. And I guess it's like an awkward feeling to the staff. For me personally, it's an awkward feeling for me to even discuss it with the patients like you guys, because I don't know if I'm making it worse for you, making you feel like, okay, it's inevitable. Sometimes it does happen, you know, it will happen or it may happen. We just don't know when. Like, I guess as a person, it's just, I don't know how to address it for it not to be uncomfortable, and which I don't know how to address end of life to other patients that are doing the same, you know, dialysis, that are dialysis patients, I guess.
Well, I think you bring up a very, very, very important topic, and I understand where you're coming from. And I think that the system really needs to deal with end-of-life issues. Medical schools are finally beginning to teach doctors about this, and I'm sure nursing schools are beginning to do the same. I think it's very, very important. A lot of people have very specific ideas about how they want to die. You know, we have hospices today. Death is not something we can ignore, and it's part of life. And it's a natural progression. It's something that if you and other dialysis staff people could talk to your managements about it, that you need to be able to discuss these things, or you need to find a way, even if a small announcement is put up about an individual and gives some of their background when they pass. I think people would feel a lot more comfortable with that. The system won't change unless we press for it, unless we, from the patient side, from the clinician side, if we press and we say, well, I know about HIPAA and I know about all these, you know, privacy issues, but if we talked to the patient before and we knew the patient's mind, now be it that the patient doesn't want people to know, that's one thing. But you need to talk to the people before that. There needs to be some counseling on it. Too many doctors run away from it. I understand that, and they often leave it with the nurses, and that's very, very unfair. But I think if we don't push back,
It's terrible. This one,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
on the pull out documentation, the driver license.
I think that just might be background noise, David.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Did that help?
Yes.
With the comment that was made.
that help you at all, Persian?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
So I would just suggest that, you know, find the right time in the right place. Find someone within your organization. You might even have to write a letter to the president of the company or doctor who's the director. I know it takes a lot of courage to do that. You might get other people to sign the letter with you. I think it's a vital cause, and it's the only way you can change the system. Any other comments?
Take advantage of David, folks. I'm sure you have other questions or thoughts, or have had difficult patients. Maybe he can help give an idea on.
Yeah. What about a patient with anger? Anybody have particularly tough patient?
Oh, yes, we do.
We could almost hear you, but you're too soft. Could you move a little closer to the mic?
Hi, David, this is Susan calling from Alhambra. Yeah, we do have some patients with anger. You know, you cannot talk to them. It's really hard to educate them. They don't listen. So what we handle this issue.
So David, could you hear her at all?
Somewhat. It's very soft.
Okay, so what I heard, and please by all means speak up if I'm paraphrasing you incorrectly, but she says they do have angry patients and they're very, very difficult to give any education to or to deal with, and is asking for your suggestion.
It's very possible that giving them the self-diagnostic tools that are in the kit, I mean, they're actually, the tests, they can fill them out. They're fairly simple to do. Just leave it with them and say, you know, you might fill this out and see how you score. And you might find out some interesting things about yourself. Usually people who are angry have a whole series of unresolved problems that may have nothing to do with you or with the fact that they're in dialysis. They might have been angry before they got there. There might be huge family problems. There might be problems with parents that have lingered for years and they really need to discuss it with people. You might look for clues of some things that they say, you know, and possibly work with the social worker and provide them a page or two from the kit and say, read this. You might find it interesting. And don't put any value judgment on it. Let them, I think people who are angry tend to need to discover things on their own. They don't want to be told what to do. You know, the anger is probably very, very, very deep-seated. And it may need, you know, the help of a psychiatrist or psychologist. But, you know, you sort of look for an opening. Don't say you're depressed, but say, I've got something here you might be interested in. And just leave it at that. You never know where it'll take them. If they wind up wanting to talk to you about it, even if they sound angry, you may have created an opportunity. What about the patient who's totally passive? Like they don't want to take responsibility. They don't want to learn how to read their labs. They don't want to keep their diet. They just expect you to take care of them totally. We have patients like that?
Yes.
Tell me about them.
Was that you? Give David an example.
Hi, David. So I have the patient. When you talk to him, he said, "Oh, leave me alone."
Please move closer to the mic or speak up a little bit.
Okay. Better?
Much better.
Oh, thank you. So the patient doesn't want to listen anything. Just tell us, leave me alone.
So you got a patient who basically is withdrawn.
Mm-hmm.
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
That's a real tough one. It's probably anger underneath it all. I would try and get that patient interested on another subject. My wife just handed me a note, and I think that she has got a very good point. Or try to talk to a caregiver. You know, when the patient gets dropped off, hopefully there's a family member there, or if a note or a telephone call can be made to a family member. You know, you have to find out what kind of support exists at home, if any. A lot of patients who are on dialysis feel that they're a burden to their family. And if they complain, they'll be a greater burden. Most people don't like to stick out. You know, they don't like to be noticed. And oftentimes I did a lot of peer mentoring a few years back in my old dialysis unit. And I actually saw patients, and I think when you have a patient-to-patient conversation, it's a very powerful means of reaching patients because you have credibility as a patient who's gone through what they're going through. But I found I had most success when I had the patient and family members in the same room. And not while the patient was on treatment, but at another time. And we really had great success in reaching people. They were much more relaxed. Having the family member around them made them feel like they weren't alone. They weren't being ganged up on, if you know what I mean. In other words, they weren't a minority. There's a whole dynamic that exists when you enter a dialysis clinic, and you don't see the person outside of the dialysis clinic. That's a real disadvantage for you. So you almost it's what I was saying earlier about putting yourself in the patient's chair, not only in the patient's chair, but in their lives, finding out what it is that they really want and what they need. Nobody wants dialysis, I'll tell you that. Okay, and I'm sure you know that. It's painful. It's at best it makes them feel somewhat better. But even if you could get a really tough patient to work towards a transplant, that would be huge. And oftentimes what I discovered was the patient didn't want to ask for a transplant, even though there were family members who were willing to be donors. And the chances of finding a good match from a family donor is very high. They didn't want to do it because they thought they would be more of a burden to their families with a transplant, which of course isn't true. So there are ways of changing the conversation, I think is what I'm saying about. Just trying to pick up on some something the patient might say that's not dialysis related. You know, and saying, well, you know, is there someone at home that I could talk about this if you don't want to talk about it? You know, you know, it's a slow process. Nothing's going to happen overnight. But breakthroughs do occur. And often I think I've often met patients who are longtime patients in clinics, and they're highly trusted by the staff. They're highly compliant patients, and they tend to be, in a lot of cases, like what I call den mothers. Most of them are older women who've done well on dialysis, and the other patients trust them. And oftentimes using that person to converse with someone who's angry or withdrawn can be very, very helpful and very revealing, in a way that they're not looked upon as the enemy, and unfortunately you may be. Does that help?
Yes. Thank you, David.
Any other questions? We've got time for a couple more questions.
Hi, Mr. Rosenblum. This is Marlene. Can you hear me?
Very well, thank you.
Good. This is Marlene from Lompoc Dialysis. You know, all the questions that you're asking us, we all have those kinds of patients here. And yeah, different ways on how to communicate with them. That's just what makes it work. But right now, what we're working on is a patient that does not want her family to be involved in her care. Even though the family cares for her, but she doesn't want us to call the family. Well, number one, you know, with a high phosphorus and
I think
Hey, Marlene, you accidentally got muted.
Yeah, your mic's off.
okay, there. Am I back?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
So she's not
Yeah.
following the diet.
She's not following the diet. Yes, sir.
Does the family know about the need for the diet?
The thing with that is she does not want us to talk to the family. And even though, I mean, if the patient don't give us a okay to call the family, you know, what can we do? I mean, if we call the family, then we did it against the patient's will.
Has she given you a reason for not wanting to talk to the family?
She said that my husband's in school, she works, my kids are in school, they're working, they're busy, I don't want to bother them. Okay. And you're right in saying something that there are patients that doesn't want to be a bother to their family.
Yeah.
And she wants to continue to be a mother to them. Yeah.
Right. So she's the one that keeps the family together, and she doesn't want to be more of a burden.
Correct.
What you have to do is explain to her that the sicker she gets, the more of a burden she's going to be. And then in the long term, her health is not going to be better, it's going to be worse. And that if her family loses her, then they're in much worse. And I think you have to be very blunt with someone like this. You have to tell them,
yeah.
You have to, well, maybe it's telling them over again or finding another patient to tell them that.
You know, the only way I got a good timing on telling her more bluntly on this situation is because she's been in the hospital like 3 times in over 1 week.
Oh my gosh.
Back and forth, back and forth. That's why I said, okay, this is it. I'll have to call your family, I said. And she actually, like last week or sometime last week, and she said, okay, you know.
Good.
It's just something has to happen that way in order for us to have the family join us. But I'm actually getting a meeting with the family next week. But, you know, again, you know, there's our different patients. And what being a patient before Mr. Rosenblum, how do you feel about the staff?
Oh,
You know,
I think dialysis staffs are among the most warm and friendly medical professionals I've ever met. I think dialysis staffers, nurses, the techs, they really get to know their patients. At least if you're open with them, if you're conversant with them, they become like friends. It's rare. It's rare. It doesn't happen necessarily in other medical fields, but it happens in dialysis. Dialysis is for a lot of people is another home. And I think it's very positive. And I think that's why we put up too many barriers. And when I say we, I think, you know, Medicare and there are too many rules. You know, we really need to let people talk to each other and go through what you've had to go through with this woman. I mean, being in the hospital 3 times in 1 week is ridiculous. It obviously dawned on her that it was ridiculous and that she wasn't going to get any better. My feeling, I mean, I'm a very self-directed, independent person. I always have been. It's probably the only reason that I'm the only non-depressive person in my family. But I realized that the longer I stayed in dialysis, even though I was compliant and even though I liked the unit I was in, I wasn't progressing. I wasn't getting better. I did a lot of research on my own, and I found out that I wasn't getting enough dialysis. And in my 3rd year of dialysis, out of the 6.5, I asked to be trained to do dialysis at home. And I actually, for 8 months, had a Fresenius 2008H machine at home. I actually was a dialysis technician. I learned how to fix the machine and repair it because I wanted my independence. I also picked up a treatment, 1 more treatment a week. And that made a world of difference. And then I heard about the next stage machine, which meant you did dialysis 6 days a week, hemodialysis, and you could travel with the machine. Well, I did that. And I was back up on my feet. I was back to work full time, and I had my life back. When I was called for the transplant, I was very blasé about it. You know, I went. I was fully positive about it. I was in better shape than I would have been otherwise. And I was out of the hospital in 5 days, and it's 10 years now, and my kidney is rock solid. So knock on wood, I've been lucky. But for me, it was running my own life the way I wanted to. And in a lot of cases, I think we have to be very honest with ourselves that the way the system has been run for the last 4 or 5 decades, 3 days a week treatment is inadequate. It doesn't really clean the blood consistently. It doesn't get rid of the big molecules, the phosphorus and the potassium. We need more technology. We need better dialysis, whether it's home dialysis, whether it's going back to PD, whatever it is. And I think we have to be blunt about it. That we have to say, okay, this isn't working. You know, we're still losing too many patients, and we're still seeing too many more people coming into dialysis every year. It's just, we need to have a real serious conversation with the system and with ourselves about it if we want to see things improve. And we want to keep people out of the hospitals. Because the hospital is the worst place you can be. You know, hospitals are bad for you. People die in hospitals. Anybody else?
Time for last question or thought from David?
That was a pretty far out statement I made. You're all going to sit there?
They're way too polite to argue with you, David.
Oh, don't be polite. This is a very important matter. I wouldn't be taking my time to do this. I don't get paid to do this.
You do realize everyone on the call is on the project to reduce hospitalizations, though.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I hate hospitals. I've had too many.
I think we do too.
I hate hospitals. I almost died once in a hospital, and it was due to medical error. and I sat on a hospital, I sat on the USC Hospital Quality Committee for a year. I was the only patient to do so. And I'm not shy, you can tell that. And I speak my mind, and I do a lot of research. And I know people like Barbara, and they're very good educators. It's really on our shoulders to change the system. It's not going to change otherwise. These problems are going to continue until we put our foot down and say, no, I don't want to do it this way anymore. I want to see these people healthy, and I want to see them leave dialysis. And it's not going to happen unless people at your stage of the game, nurses, techs, the administrators, say, this is ridiculous. We're not improving things. It's generally thought that it's more difficult to be in dialysis than it is to have cancer. And speaking from personal experience, I agree with that. I was operated on for a small melanoma last December. I have a pacemaker. I'm 72 years old, so I'm not going anywhere in terms of age. I'm only getting older and sicker, but it hasn't stopped me from learning and pressing back at the system. And that's the only way it's going to change. There are too many people interested in the status quo. And until they become patients, they don't understand it. You people understand it. You people can have a huge impact on reducing hospitalizations by speaking up. It takes a lot of guts. I admit it. But, you know, I've been very outspoken for years. Barb can tell you that. And I've never once been retaliated against. Because I know where I'm coming from. I have friends in the community who can back me up. And I think that's what it takes. It takes concerted effort to push. It also takes more coordination between hospitals and dialysis clinics.
Which is why we all push for EMR access.
Yes,
most
exactly.
of this group has EMR access. Not quite all. We're working on it.
But
most of this group has
that's critical because so many people do not understand what dialysis is about, including many people in the ER units. And you lose that contact, and the patient often isn't the best conduit for information.
So on those final thoughts, David, I want to thank you so much for speaking and thank everybody for participating in the call today. I hope you all got about 20 nuggets, if not more, out of it. And I hope you enjoy your day and don't melt down there.
No, we won't. Thank you again. Thank you all for listening.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.